Today we have all the latest NHL trade rumors heading into the deadline. We have the latest on Hampus Lindholm and Anaheim. We have a lot to talk about when it comes to Seattle Kraken. They look to be very busy heading into their first ever NHL trade deadline. We have a variety of teams interested now in JT Miller in Vancouver. We're going to talk about a potential Kings-Canucks deal. The Rangers are heavily involved in the market as well. Plus, the Golden Knights have officially placed Robin Lehner on IR. Will they be goalie shopping here in the near future? All that and more coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of NHL trade rumors to talk about here today. First up, we get the news that Robin Lehner is officially on injured reserve. Now, of course, we've been talking recently about the fact that he does have a shoulder injury, believed to be a torn labrum, which is going to be an extensive recovery, likely going to require surgery, something that they're hoping he can hold off and do after the season. But at this point, now that he's officially on IR, you have to wonder just how hard a time he's having and if that's going to be something he's going to be able to do. So it's been suspected already, regardless if he ends up on LTIR or not, that they're going to have to figure out a way to bring in another goaltender to strengthen that position ahead of the playoffs. I don't know that they really want to go with Lehner and Brossoit. I mean, Brossoit is a solid backup goaltender, but if Lehner can't go, they could be in trouble when it comes to the playoffs. They have a lot invested into this season. They're hoping to get Mark Stone back for the playoffs. They just got Jack Eichel after the big trade earlier for playing his first few games. They're going to want to make sure they're well equipped. So, there's a variety of NHL goalies around the league that could be available for different price tags. Hard to say what happens, but certainly going to be a situation that we need to keep our eyes on here in the next week or two, I think, or at least ahead of the deadline for sure. Now, when it comes to the Anaheim Ducks, we know that the Ducks are a team that they could make the playoffs, but it's far from a given. There's still lots of games left, and they have some tough decisions to make. They have a lot of big-name unrestricted free agents. New GM there, Pat Verbeek's going to have a lot of tough decisions. They have Hampus Lindholm and Josh Manson on the back end. They've got Ryan Getzlaf, Rickard Rakell, and a few others up front. They have a lot to really kind of figure out what they're going to do here ahead of the deadline. I mean, we've heard recent talks that it seems like it's pretty likely that Hampus Lindholm is going to test free agency. There's no guarantee that he leaves the Ducks, but if he wants to test free agency, there's a good chance that they're going to end up trading him ahead of the deadline. The Ducks are certainly not at a point where they're a cup contender. To me, if they're going to risk losing this guy in the summertime, it makes sense to get what they can for him as of right now. A lot of reporters and NHL insiders feel there's a greater likelihood that Josh Manson re-signs than Lindholm, and that Lindholm, as much as they'd like to keep him, might be the guy that does not come back on the blue line next year. So the Florida Panthers are a team reportedly connected to Lindholm. I wouldn't rule out the Carolina Hurricanes either. Both teams are having phenomenal regular seasons near the top of the NHL and are going to be looking to add likely both on the blue line here ahead of the deadline. Florida is just a real solid team. I mean, they've had a few games lately, been up and down a little bit, but still, they're going to want to make sure they equip themselves as best they can for the playoffs. They've been linked to some other NHL defensemen as well, a variety of them as well, including John Klingberg, Ben Chiarot, and a few other pending UFA. So Hampus Lindholm is the latest to draw the attention of the Panthers, and it's hard to say where they're going to set their sights here when we get closer, but it does look like he's increased the likelihood of getting dealt, and the Panthers amongst the Hurricanes are right near the top of the list amongst the teams, at least as of today, that are the most interested. Now, when it comes to the Kraken, as I mentioned, their first ever NHL trade deadline should be incredibly busy. They have a lot of players on expiring contracts. Of course, they're nowhere near the playoffs. And some of these players, I think it's fair to say, they may not be having a long-term future with the Kraken. Now, when Vegas was through their first year, we saw them sign a lot of their guys on short-term deals to extensions because everything went so incredibly well. Well, things have not necessarily had the same impact here in Seattle. A few names to keep your eye on include top scorer Jared McCann, who's 1 year away from being a pending unrestricted free agent. Of course, it is possible the Kraken decide to hang on to him and offer him a long-term deal, but he's already hit a career high in goals. He should have a career high in points here shortly, really thriving from the opportunity of having a larger role, and I would imagine he's going to generate a fair bit of interest ahead of the deadline because of the pending UFA status, but that's not a given that the Kraken move him like some of the other players. That they apparently have had talks with Mark Giordano, and it's believed that they have an agreement in place that he will likely be dealt. Just a matter of finding the right opportunity that works well for himself and the team. So expect their first captain, Giordano, to likely be traded, as we've talked about. He has been linked to his former team, the Calgary Flames, to the Maple Leafs as well, and the Rangers, and a few others too. Like, there's lots of interest out there. Hard to say where he ends up exactly. Kelly Yarncroke's another name on a pending UFA status deal that could gain interest. There are reports that he's getting some interest from the Washington Capitals, so there's another player to watch out for as well, and that's just the start. There's certainly others as well, to a lesser degree, that will generate some interest here. Marcus Johansson's another name to watch too. I mean, he's another pending UFA who's got a decent amount of experience and played in the playoffs enough times before that some teams will certainly take a look here. So obviously, as I said before, the expansion draft situation with the Seattle Kraken was kind of mind-blowing in a sense, and how many players they did not take that I really thought they would. And now we're going to probably see a mass sell-off, or at least pretty close to that, ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Now, as I mentioned, the Vancouver Canucks, the LA Kings, and the New York Rangers are all kind of connected here, with the Canucks being the team that has the players that are generating some interest. Obviously, we know JT Miller's gotten a lot of interest. We've seen the recent connection to the Toronto Maple Leafs. We've heard before about the New York Rangers wanting to bring back a player who they're very familiar with. Miller, of course, played on Broadway before. And, of course, the LA Kings are the latest team to pop up here in the rumor mill of being connected to JT Miller. Now, of course, the price tag is going to be high. The Rangers and the Kings both have significant deep pools of prospects and picks that they could draw from to make that deal. Probably much better so than the Toronto Maple Leafs. And we know that the Kings want to add another player like they did last offseason with Victor Arvidsson, so somebody with term. The Kings have a lot of very interesting prospects, so to me, they'd have no problem, depending on what they want to part with, of course, putting together a package for Miller. So we'll see what happens. When it comes to the Rangers, the latest talk from Arthur Staple was that he believes the Rangers have a lot more interest in JT Miller than they would in any other Canuck forward, including Besser or Garland, who's also each had his name mentioned at various times in the trade rumor mill too. We know the Canucks are looking to make some cap flexibility, but they're not the only ones that are out there. I mean, clearly Tyler Myers is another name on defense who's played a little bit better this year, who's been generating some talk in the rumor mill as well. So it's not a given that one of these three forwards are going to be the guy to go. Now, when it comes to the LA Kings too, the other connection here to watch out for that I think makes a lot of sense. We know the Kings want to likely add another forward, and we know also, based on reports from Arthur Staple and Elliot Friedman and a few others here, that they may not want to give up as much when it comes to a Miller trade. So if that's the case, they could turn their sights to another Canuck forward that they are very familiar with and would cost less, and could bring back Tanner Pearson. Of course, guys like Pearson, Toffoli, both left LA when things were really down. They were struggling mightily, but they've gone on to kind of rejuvenate their careers elsewhere. And now, Pearson to go back to LA, I'm not going to say it's a real solid possibility, but it would not be shocking. He's a guy they could acquire for a much lower price tag than Miller. Different player, different impact, but still somebody they could add to their lineup ahead of the playoffs, and have that familiarity with, and boost their lineup here a little bit. But on the Rangers side of things, of course, Arthur Staple talking about the fact that there is real legit interest in Miller as a player for the Rangers to add. We know, based on how they're playing, that it's very, very likely they want to add a top six. Miller certainly would be one of the most interesting, but according to Staple, he's also reporting that they have reached out to Nashville and engaged conversations around Filip Forsberg. Now, he didn't really say that anything was imminent or anything of that nature, but he did indicate that Forsberg might be a costly enough rental that it's hard to say for sure what kind of goes down, given the fact that Miller comes with term, right? So they can have him for at least one more year. They might be able to justify that price a little bit, whereas Forsberg's, unless they can sign him, and that's going to be an expensive contract that they may not be able to afford, he's going to be more of a pure rental, and just, it might be a little bit less likely that they want to spend a big price tag to get that done. But, at the end of the day, I suspect the Rangers to go after somebody that fits the bill like both of these guys do. I mean, Filip Forsberg is still only in his late 20s, hitting the prime of his career, Gonna likely hit career highs in goals and points this year. Absolutely phenomenal. But of course, you see that a lot when players are playing for a contract, right? So you have to watch that and be careful. Not to say that he's gonna, slack off, but I know that's probably why, part of the reason at least, why the Predators are a little gun shy to get this done as well, because they have guys like Johansson and Duchesne who, yes, this year are playing better, but before this year, the last few years after getting their long-term deals were not good. And they've seen that firsthand where they've signed a contract, the player coming off a career year, well, he's playing for a contract, and then they get burned, basically. So they don't really want to go through that again. So that's going to be tough. So we'll see what happens. There's different reports out there on Forsberg, where things stand. I've seen some like Andy Strickland say he's being shopped. I've seen Elliot Friedman say that he doesn't really think it's so much being shopped. It's just that they do want to sign him, but they're gauging the market, so to speak, to kind of figure out what the interest levels are at and kind of have some early conversations in case they can't sign him. Because if they can't sign him, it does sound like David Poile might prefer to do a trade to get something back than risk losing him for nothing in the offseason. So difficult to say where things stand on that front. And then lastly, on the New York Islanders, Josh Bailey is going to be a healthy scratch again today for the second straight game. He has been mentioned recently in NHL Trade Rumours, been linked to a team like the Minnesota Wild here recently by Dave Pagnotta. I know personally I said I wasn't sure there was going to be a lot to that rumor. Doesn't mean he's going to Minnesota. Doesn't even mean he's getting traded. But after, considering how he's played this year and suddenly he's just being scratched with all the trade chatter around his name, it just makes you think and wonder that maybe something is up. We'll have to wait and see, of course. Doesn't mean that's necessarily for sure the case, but at the same time, you can't help but wonder if Lou is going to be working on something. Considering the disastrous season on Long Island, he's going to have to be another GM that makes a few moves here ahead of the deadline to get things going in the right direction, because they certainly have been a major disappointment this year. They got a brand new arena. Obviously, fans are not overly pleased with where things are at right now, and they need to do something to get this back on track so that next year, hopefully, they can bounce back, because that's not going to be good if they can't. And it's certainly a concern for a lot of players on this team that are getting older, slowing down, and you have to have serious concerns about how quickly can they flip this around, and is this team getting too old and too slow too quickly to really keep up with all the momentum they've built in the last couple of years? So let me know what your thoughts are on that as well, and everything else discussed today down in the comment, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.